afternoon, and welcome to the first special panel of 15th All India Conference of China Studies, organized by Institute of Chinese Studies and the Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati, in cooperation with Guwahati University and Umuyo Kumar Das Institute of Social Change and Development. We are also in partnership with India Office, Conrad Adenauer Stiftung. The theme for the special panel is the state of China studies in India. To chair the discussion, we have with us Professor Manoranjan Mohanty, Emeritus Fellow and former Chairperson of AICCS. He is currently a distinguished professor at the Council of Social Development, New Delhi. He's a former professor of Department of Political Science, University of Delhi. We have 5 speakers on the panel. Our first speaker is Professor G. Venkat Raman, who is currently a professor at Humanities and Social Science area, Indian Institute of Management, Indore, and he's also an adjunct fellow at AICCS. He will speak on the challenges of studying China, making a case of cautious optimism. Our second speaker is Dr. Usha Chandran, assistant professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University and adjunct fellow at Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. Another speaker is Mr. Raj Gupta, PhD candidate in CCSCAS, JNU, New Delhi. Both of them will be speaking on relevance of Chinese language in China studies in India. Our third presentation is by Dr. Arvind Yelleri, a senior research fellow, associate professor grade at Peking University in Beijing. He's also the adjunct fellow at AICCS. Our last speaker will be Dr. Rityosha Manitewari, who teaches at the Department of Political Science, Shahid Bhagat Singh College, University of Delhi, and is currently an honorary fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies. Before I invite Professor Mohanty to begin the proceedings, let me lay out a few housekeeping rules. All the participants except the speakers are expected to be muted for the entire duration of the event. Attendees can post their questions via the chat box or use the raise hand option during the Q&A session. Please unmute yourself only when you're called upon to do so by the chair. I will now invite the chair to begin the proceedings. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. This is indeed a great occasion. It would have been great to be physically present in the beautiful IIT campus and Guwahati and meet with so many people who have joined online. But then we would have missed many others who could not have come there. So there is a trade-off. But I hope we will be able to reassemble in Guwahati in the near future on some other pretext, if not in future, another conference of All India China Studies. Indeed, it's a historic occasion after listening to the speakers of the first, the inaugural session, especially Professor Sitaram, and the memorable address as expected from Professor Prasanjit Dwara. We have really an idea about the tasks that the present generation and the future generations of China scholars in India face. Professor Dwara, I will not dwell too much on it, but Professor Dwara made a very important point about connected histories, note the plurality. And the theme of this conference is connected geographies and cultural interfaces. And the new and wider meaning of connection, not in terms of territorial contiguity, territorial connections, but cultural, trade, various kinds of interactions, networks that he laid before us through his many works beforehand, but particularly in his recent book and today's lecture, really was the most appropriate inaugural address, keynote address for this conference. And that unfolds in course of the 4 presentations or the 5 presentations that we have today. The only other point I will make is that the history of China studies, from China Bhavan days till today, if not earlier, has something that we will listen to from Professor Madhavi Thampi later, but has posed one challenge always. This is in the very nature of pursuit of knowledge. That knowledge has to take us closer to reality through so many diverse sources, which require language studies, historical studies, and so on, and field visits and archival work and all kinds of sources, but also constantly checking on the boundaries created for us between spheres. And Professor Dwara's presentation and Professor Sitaram pointed out, the kind of interdisciplinary work that goes on in IIT. So because categories emerge from disciplines and they are bounded, and we have to overcome them. So these 2 themes, namely sources and knowledge categories, intellectual categories, have to constantly challenge us to redefine our course of research, teaching, and pursuit of knowledge in general. With these remarks, now I open the discussion. Well, I had thought we will make it 12 minutes, but originally we had circulated 15 minutes, so I leave it to the speakers. But certainly we need some time for discussion. I would still, let us settle for 13, 14 minutes maximum. And after 12 minutes, an indication will be given by the MC of this session. May I invite Professor Venkat Raman to open the discussion with his very interesting topic, Challenges of Studying China. He has Cautious Optimism as the subtitle. Venkat.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you, AICCS, for this opportunity to participate once again in this special panel. Without taking much time, I'll straight away get to my thoughts. So, why do I say that one needs to look at sinology as it exists today, current state of sinology, with cautious optimism? Why is it that I'm optimist? I'm optimist because if you look at last few years, the state of sinology has come a long way. I mean, few decades back, only 2-3 decades back, the serious study of China was confined to few centers, China Bhavan, Shantiniketan, JNU, Delhi University. That's it. But in the last 10-15 years, we have seen that there has been an increasing, increasingly we have seen emergence of new centers beyond these, traditional centers of sinology. Again, experts, China watchers, whatever you may call, like for a very long period of time, they were located at Delhi. They continue to be dominated, the sinology debates and all that, in terms of coverage of media. But again, it is not very uncommon nowadays to see people from regional centers commenting on various aspects of developments that are happening in China. Third, every 5 years, the party congress happens. That is one indication that the number of, the various dimensions in which many of the China watchers in India are trying to understand whatever is happening in China, that again, that platform is just widening, which is a very, very encouraging sign. So today we have China watchers beyond Delhi. And it's very encouraging that, recruitment of China Watchers is increasingly taking place in various educational institutions. So IIT Madras has a China Center as part of their humanities and social sciences. IIM, when, I entered IIM 10 years back, more than 10 years back, my USP was China, and that's why I was taken. What we did later on, that's a different story. Similarly, if you look at someone like Bhim, the sinologist, the fact that his credentials are being recognized, the importance of China is recognized. He's in Central University, Hyderabad. Similarly, National Institute of Advanced Studies, Center for, the Triple CS in Chennai. So I think there is a kind of a increasing, understanding that this is an area which we need to seriously invest on. Emergence of private universities investing big on China studies, Ashoka Center now, and OP Jindal University, Takshashila, so Shivnadar. So therefore, this is a very encouraging sign. And most importantly, we can see this plethora, or I wouldn't say plethora, I mean, growing number of, China watchers, especially of relatively young generation. I still consider myself young. So people who are of my generation, we have been very, very fortunate in terms of what we got in the last 15 to 20 years. India, China, track 1, track 2, got a certain kind of a purple patch, I would say. And in fact, it started from late 1990s, and then after SARS, there has been a growing economic and bilateral ties, bilateral economic and commercial ties between the two countries, growing track two exchanges, and new kinds of scholarships and opportunities from from the Taiwan office in India, Howard Yanqing, etc., etc. So therefore, this increase, what we are witnessing today, in terms of growing number of young China watchers is a function of a purple patch, which I just mentioned a few of the factors. Now, two issues stand out here. How do we capitalize what we have, achieved because of this purple patch, because of the opportunities that our generation has got? And second, given that those opportunities suddenly have kind of dropped down, how do we tide over the current challenges whereby younger ones, continue to stay invested in China and, make them battle ready? And this is a challenge and opportunity for the current scholars, both the senior ones and the not so senior ones, people like me and others who are speaking in this particular platform. The fact that there has been a certain decline in bilateral ties, limited funding opportunities, what do we do? That's the question. What do we do? These are the challenges. So largely, the challenges which we can actually do something lie in two areas of teaching and research. As far as teaching is concerned, how do we get to, encourage younger people, younger students, study China? One of the ways in which, ICS has been doing it is taking it across to various regional centers. But whether it is the timing factor or whether it is, a question of time constraints, somehow, I don't think the desired amount of returns have taken place. And we have thought about it. So maybe organizers and others, we can discuss it later. Every time we go to a regional center, either after the annual conference or before the annual conference, we need to have a 2-3 day workshop whereby resource people come and actually instigate, invest and time and create a kind of a spark in the younger generation to take up China studies seriously. Second challenge is how do we teach China? Are we going to basically teach China as a standalone, kind of a subject in the various regional centers wherever we have opportunities to teach? And if we don't have that kind of an opportunity, how do we integrate China studies in terms of larger core courses and elective courses that we are having? And whether it is a standalone course or whether it is a integrated course as a special module dedicated, dedicated to China and part of a larger course, what we need to basically invest in is, what are the various pedagogical tools that, are appealing to the, students today? I mean, we all know that irrespective of whichever subjects one is talking of nowadays, today's students are far more demanding, and they don't have, even in B schools, they don't have time to read 20-25 page case studies. Invariably, prestigious case centers are saying that your case should not be more than 8 to 10 pages. So therefore, the need to come up with case studies, caselets, and have simulations and all these things. How do we do this? And and this is where I feel that China studies in various educational institutions today needs to be strongly supported by the topmost leadership. Well, it has taken place in some of the educational institutions, but again, whether it is due to COVID, or whether it is sensitive bilateral ties that has been happening post June 15th, there seems to be a certain kind of a hesitancy in terms of promoting this. But we all know, it has been said that know your enemies, know your friends well, know your enemies even better. So somehow that logic has not engaged the attention of our academic educational institutions topmost leadership. They say that we are here to promote all kinds of studies, not only China studies. But I think some things stand as all are equal, but some are more equal than others. And so therefore, I suppose, given our national interests and other things, it's very, very important to give sinology the kind of due it deserves, if not for others, for our own interests. So, core courses, yes, very important, but it's a duty on our part, especially the younger faculty, to make the core courses so interesting that they basically bring out a carrot, to dangle a carrot and get the young students invested and interested in opting for certain electives. And this is very, very important in terms of attracting bright talent. All India conference, again, as I said, post-COVID needs to make the outreach more meaningful. And I also take this opportunity that all the China, centers all over the country, directly, indirectly, I think time has come where we join hands, and once in a year we conduct some kind of a summer school, whereby we have some kind of a procedure on basis of which we attract some young talent, middle age, middle level, and even senior, people who have got interest on China studies, and raise this public awareness about sinology in general. I don't think it's why is it important? It's as obvious as daylight. Why it is still not engaging the attention, that defies any logic for me. So this is what few thoughts on teaching. So research, the next is research. So it's very, very important that we need to internalize the link between teaching, research, teaching. So this is a loop that needs to be very, very strong. um, and although in the recent past there has been an increase in number of books that have scholarly publications, I would say, by academics, by scholarly diplomats, uh, but the point is, there has not been enough of Indian sinologists' presence in the journal circles. We have prestigious journals like China Quarterly, Journal of Chinese Political Science, Journal of Contemporary China, the China Journal from ANU. Uh, if you just run through all these journals in the last 30-40 years, for different reasons, with no offense to anyone, the Indian presence, scholar presence, Indian sinologist presence is pretty low. And until unless we are, establishing that kind of a presence in the global scenario and put ourselves in the global map, I don't think sinology from India is going to be seriously taken. And that's the challenge. So that brings me to the next thing. Yeah, it's very easy to say from I am Indore sitting in this chair, where do you get the funding from? Now, funding, yes, it's the elephant in the room. Now, I am very aware that many of us, earlier generations, even some of us, and maybe generations afterwards also, there will always be this kind of a struggle that why do we want to do research? There are deontological reasoning for research, but there is teleological reasoning for research also. Given the paucity of funding, we need to have certain kind of a balance between how we approach research. In other words, I think increasingly we need to make, or at least a part of our research should have should have ample policy making implications, ample policy, in fact, more than ample policy making implications. And
Venkat, another 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm done. Second is, how do we make this, our research policy implications? I think there is a very, very important requirement for making our research multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, which again takes me to, looking into those notions of China studies, which have largely been, kind of held hostage by our kind of a certain kind of obsession with traditional military security reasons. I don't say they are not important; they are very, very important. But so are other things important. So, public-private partnership. What is it that China is doing? Environmental governance, renewable energy, the tech factor. What is the state capitalism Beijing consensus all about? I mean, few years back, the Chinese were not very open about, the whole world going gaga over virtues of Beijing consensus, but gone are those days. And today, the Chinese government, the party state, is not only, hesitating, not only not hesitating in, saying that, we have come here, we have arrived on the world stage through BRI, AIIB, but they're saying that we are worthy of emulating. So this is, what we are looking at is a certain kind of a value clash as far as state capitalism, market capitalism, and the kind of capitalism, hybrid capitalism that India has. So what are those lessons that, we can think of in terms of researching? Tech value chain disruptions is another thing. So in next 5 years or so, what I said, research, is very, very important. And if we need funding, then we need to make our research more policy relevant as well. And that is the challenge. Healthier collaborations between, language specialists and social sciences. I'm sure my colleague Usha and Raj, they are going to share more about this. But we have been talking about this for a very long time, but unfortunately, not much has happened. Now, if we are to achieve all these goals, we need to have strong collaboration. To conclude, just I was reading, just give me 1.5 minutes, sir, I'll finish. So I was just reading, an article, and in that article, what was highlighted was the state of sinology and how China watchers in US are looking at China. So we all are largely given to understand that there is an anti-China consensus, but that's a superficial part of it. If you scratch the surface, it seems there are 4 different, schools of thought when it comes to dealing with China. So they are strategic competitors, there are engagement, vouchers. They are the third set of people are those who are talking about competitive coexistence, and then there are the new tech war, people. So similarly, and all these different schools of thought are are exchanging their narratives and kind of having an informed understanding and having an certain right kind of policy implications as to what US is going to do regarding China. Now, what except a broad classification of India watchers as far as China is concerned, there are hawks and there are doves, but are there, more subtle and, informed understanding of China, whereby these exchanges of opinion can take place, new narratives can be born out. So that is something which we need to, explore. And this kind of a healthy exchange has to go beyond traditional boundaries of military security. So this is, so therefore this is the time for an informed debate, and I think given that we share our geographical boundaries with China, and for a very long time we have a civilizational contact, it's now or never. So therefore it's very critical for our own national interests that we stay invested. And I end up with this optimism that things are not looking great, but we don't need to feel despondent about it. And if we go about doing our things, and collaborative networks are explored, I'm sure we will have an Indian voice of sinology which will gain adequate footprints in the global sinology map. I stop here. Sir, we are not able to hear you. Mohanty, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I said that was a very candid picture of the field, especially teaching, research, teaching, and the need for collaboration, and what are the standards that we should keep in mind, standards of scholarship. Thank you very much. We now move to Usha, Chandran, and Raj Gupta for the next paper, which is on the relevance of Chinese language in China studies in India. Usha, please.
Good morning, everyone. So my co-presenter Raj will now share the screen. I thank ICCS for this opportunity, and I particularly thank the panel convener, Dr. Tiwari, and Professor Shabri Mitra, to actually, planted the seed in me to explore on this very important issue of relevance of Chinese language in China studies in India. So this study is aimed at exploring the relevance of language in studying a society and application of relevance of Chinese language in China studies at the university level. Now, this is an ongoing study. Therefore, in this presentation, we only bring out the methodology and the idea, and finally present the preliminary findings of the questionnaire-based survey. The last section will be presented by my co-presenter. Now, this study combines qualitative and quantitative methodology to explore the lag in Chinese language use in China studies at the university level. It first discusses the sociological concept on the relevance of language to have a more immersive and profound understanding of the society, further dwells on the importance of looking at China through the lens of Chinese language. The study will also learn from the experiences of China studies in other countries. In the first phase, the study involves questionnaire-based interview of students and scholars learning Chinese language who are also working on or observing China from all over India. In the second phase, the same would include China studies, and we also aspire to exchange shared and personal teachings and teaching and learning experiences of Chinese language and China studies. This would help us to get a more insightful discussion on the gap between demand and supply in China studies and the role of Chinese language to bring out substantial suggestions on the possible ways to enhance the use of Chinese language in China studies at the university level. Now, it's a common knowledge that language is an important channel of connection and communication among human beings. It allows individuals to share ideas, thoughts, feelings. It builds up relationships and families and societies and creates a mechanism or a structure in a society. Each society create their own culture, custom, and way of life, which may have similarities and differences from other societies. So language is known to have been preserving history, culture, and custom in the society within its ambit. Therefore, it is called the carrier of culture in a society. Upon realizing the relevance of studying a society through its language, sociologists have been exploring the role of language in social life. The social patterns of languages have been studied in the context of personal relations and groups to view a language in a social phenomenon. Now, Noam Chomsky, who introduced new perspectives on language and creativity, had stated that, and I quote, "Language is our humanity. It is used to understand ourselves and others, so as to deal with it in the reality of the world and engage in acts of meaning." Now, Edward Sapir and his pupil had developed a hypothesis that language influences thought rather than the reverse. So it influences the way we think about ourselves, and therefore the speakers of different languages therefore might think differently. However, a more recent view by some scholars argue that language plays a central role in influencing our realities, but it does not determine them. So new fields of study like sociology of language, that is the study of relationship between language and society, and sociolinguistics, that is the study of sociological aspect of language, has developed in the past few decades. The role of language in establishing, recording, and passing down the collective consciousness and memories and identities of a given society is increasingly being recognized in academics. Language is considered as one of the fundamental ways of expressing reality. Thus, the relevance of language to understand a society, its politics, its culture, and above all, the mindset of the people has been accentuated by sociolinguists for a few decades now. However, language is so intimately tied to our being that its relevance is seldom given attention to, especially while we are studying a foreign society. The challenges in learning their language resulting often results to neglect its relevance. Well, not knowing the language often leads to misjudgment and misunderstandings about a society. Looking at a society through the lens of language often tends to wide open its door. So in case of China, Chinese language, which is one of world's oldest language, is still being used. And we know that since China was never fully colonized, Mandarin is still the most commonly used language of the Chinese people. It is known to all that in China, the use of English language is extremely limited. And though in several places, local dialects are more commonly used, but however, the majority of the engagement, especially the written, is in Mandarin. The essential link between language and society is at best depicted in a pictographic script like Chinese language. The Chinese people consider themselves to be part of a collectivistic culture, and their cultural values are transmitted through daily actions and language use. The richness of the Chinese language is brought out in their expression. More than any other language of the world, Chinese language carries in itself ancient, medieval, modern, and contemporary history. It's a constant flux. It's radiating its creativity in old and new platforms like literature, academics, print media, social media, in the public speeches, leaders' speeches, and all over the internet. Now, all these are written with complex and interesting proverbs, saying, idioms, newly coined words and phrases, slangs, etc. So as Chinese language learners, we are constantly fascinated and challenged with old and new innovations in language use. In short, as China grows, the Chinese language is also constantly growing. Now, several studies, including our own study, has shown that knowledge on Chinese language opens door to Chinese society. It is more often observed that knowledge of the Chinese language helps a foreign scholar to infer cultural givens, socio-cultural stereotypes, and mindset of the Chinese people. Besides, the ability to read and comprehend academic discourse in the source language goes a long way in formulating a more precise epistemological knowledge framework. There are several accounts of scholars who experience that knowing the language opened several doors for them to easily permeate into the Chinese society. Now, one of the important reflections on China studies in India was done at the 2006 colloquium on the review of China studies in India. The colloquium compilation and the 2021 ICS occasional paper on actually recognizes that language is an important component of the study of China, and its incompetency is a major hurdle in research on China in India. Some eminent language scholars have strongly suggested the need to train students in both language and area studies to enhance the quality of research on China. China studies scholars have indicated that knowledge of China in India continues to be filtered through Western source. They emphasize the need for Chinese studies program to include intensive study on language, on Chinese language. Now, another Professor Sen in his 2013 paper, Is There a Need for China Studies in India, argues the case of extreme lack of interest in investing in the field of China studies and the dismal state of Chinese language in India, as well as the lack in the use of Chinese language as sources in China studies. In short, in China, there seem to be a fairly widespread, in India, there seem to be a fairly widespread recognition that knowledge on Chinese language is important to observe China. However, the possibility of language training along with discipline training or vice versa has not been explored much in the Indian universities. As a result, many of the Indian scholars rely heavily on English language sources, mostly written by Westerners or a third country. Therefore, they may run the risk of viewing China, their the largest neighbor, from a Western lens or a third country perspective. Whereas the need for India to comprehend China as it is has been deferred for long and calls for urgent attention. The initial findings of a survey will be presented by Raj. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank ICS for this opportunity, which got me engaged in such kind of a study for the very first time. I would also like to thank my professor, Dr. Usha Chandran, for making me a part of this study. Ma'am just gave us a background on the relevance of Chinese language in China studies. So in the first phase of the study, we are attempting to bring out the findings of the survey with solicited responses from universities across India engaged in teaching the Chinese language. Now, there are a total of 4 verticals through which we gathered responses: BA, MA, PhD, and faculty, to ensure inputs on all factors at play. Chinese language at bachelor, master's, and PhD level is taught in 8 universities in India. This survey-based research intends to study the myriad of issues related to Chinese language faced by China studies. We received more than 300 responses from various institutions across India. We really thank them and hope they will agree to personally interact with us in the next phase. However, It can also be noted that due to lack of time and online surveys usually getting low responses, it is not necessary that all groups were amply represented. Now, every year, roughly 25 to 30 students on an average take admission at bachelor's level in each of the above mentioned universities. This spells out around 200 students taking admission at bachelor's level in India every year. However, how many of them actually go on to pursue research on China? And among those who are pursuing research on China, what are the problems they face? What are their motivations, aspirations to study Chinese? What perception do they hold towards China and Chinese? These are some of the questions we are focusing on in the first phase of this study. For doing so, we have divided our findings into 6 sections. While looking at the initial motivation for studying Chinese among students, an average of 51% of BA, MA, and PhD students said that it was employment opportunities, whereas only a small percentage, 10 to 16% of respondents said that they started learning Chinese because of interest in research on China. However, more than 42.8% in BA, 52.3% in MA said that they would be interested in pursuing research in future. 31.5% of BA, 25% of MA, and 53% of PhD students said that their early motivations to study China changed during the course of their study. The larger figure among PhD students reflects the fact that at some point during their study, their motivation of learning Chinese started inclining towards research. Now, the biggest motivation among PhD students for pursuing PhD is interest in teaching at 41.2%, whereas interest in research is second at 23.5%. However, 17.6% PhD students also regret choosing to pursue PhD. And the two biggest factors are materials not being easily available and that there are not many career opportunities after PhD. So to identify the challenges and obstacles, the survey analysis for BA and MA are clubbed together and PhD kept separately because PhD students face a different set of challenges altogether. So 58.1% respondents in BA and 65.9% respondents in MA feel that they face obstacles in learning Chinese. Lack of resources and issues in teaching methodology are the biggest obstacles that MA students face, whereas lack of resources and lack of self-motivation are the biggest obstacles that the BA students face. As to the level of difficulty in learning different aspects of Chinese language, the graph shows that there is very few variation in the ratings, which reflects that the difficulty level in different aspects of learning Chinese language is equally high and is perceived more or less same by the respondents. Maximum number of respondents in the faculty believe that at least 4 to 5 years of learning Chinese language is required to acquire the ability to use Chinese resources effectively for research. Approximately 59% PhD students feel that they lack in using Chinese resources for their research, and the biggest factor is lack of easy access to online source materials. The second biggest factor is the lack of resources such as Chinese books and Chinese journals. Only 9.1% say that it is owing to lack of Chinese language ability. 64.7% of the PhD research scholars believe that it is not feasible to do substantial research on China in their respective universities, owing to factors such as lack of access to Chinese resource persons' academic resources due to restrictions by the Chinese government, lack of access to Chinese websites, learning apps due to blocking by the Indian government, and no access to Chinese academic databases for research materials. PhD students believe that the two biggest factors in the lack of quality and authenticity of the research are lack of training in research methodology on China and knowledge of a certain discipline. Approximately 65% PhD respondents feel that since they are well versed with the Chinese language, they could do a better job if they also had knowledge of other disciplines. Following are the ratings of obstacles the PhD scholars and faculty members face as researchers. The first graph reflecting responses by the PhD scholars shows that...
Raj, can you conclude in another 1 or 2 minutes?
Yes, sir, in 2 minutes. Yes, sir. So the first graph reflecting responses by the PhD scholars shows that lack of guidance in a particular area of interest and lack of knowledge in academic writing are the biggest obstacles. And the second graph depicting responses by the faculty also shows lack of training in other discipline along with Chinese language, as well as COVID-induced obstacles, which include lack of opportunities to visit China or delay in visa issues as the main obstacles. Now, when asked on what level do the students connect with the Chinese language, 33.5% in BA said that they feel very natural and comfortable using it or like a second language. This increases to 48.8% in MA and 76.5% in PhD. Thus, there is a clear improvement in the level of connection with the language as the level goes higher. PhD respondents feel that their curriculum increases their knowledge on society and culture more than the politics and economy. When asked about India-China relations, 52.3% in BA, 53.5% in MA, and 43.8% in PhD feel that India-China relations are neutral. Besides, 28.2% in BA, 37.2% in MA, and 50% PhD respondents feel that it is bad or very bad. Only 19.5% BA, 9.3% MA, and 6.3% PhD feel that it is good or excellent. Most of the respondents, before they started learning Chinese at the BA and MA level, felt that China is either a strategic partner or a competitor. However, majority at the PhD level, who started learning Chinese much before them, felt that China is either a friendly neighbor or a competitor. When asked about the use of Chinese language sources for their research, 100% of the PhD scholars and faculty members among the respondents responded positively. Approximately 59% PhD scholars and 63% faculty members said that more than 50% of the resources they use in their research are in Chinese. 59% of the PhD scholars said that they try to use online translation tools to translate Chinese materials, though 81% recognize that the reliability of these online translation tools is below 50%. While 100% of the PhD scholars feel that using English language materials is also necessary. On the other hand, 63.1% of the respondents among the faculty feel that English language sources inside China are less than 50% reliable. And 68.4% feel that English language sources from outside China are more than 50% reliable. When asked about the scope, the respondents in the PhD showed a dim view. 12% feel that there is no scope, 25% feel that there is limited scope, and 41.2% feel that the scope is not as much as expected or should be. 76.5% said that they will go for a career in research on China in India, with the two biggest reasons being to go into teaching.
Oh, you got frozen.
Raj, you're frozen.
You have connection problems. You got frozen, Raj.
To overcome obstacles and challenges faced by students and scholars, following solutions at individual level were the highest rated in the responses, which include speaking in students to speak, use of technical tools like PPT, videos, recordings, etc., frequent interaction with native speakers, and exploring new teaching methodologies. At the institutional level, the solutions that were the highest rated were language labs equipped with latest technology, access to paid academic websites, providing other resources, and providing funds for exchange programs, seminars, and invited lectures. At the government level, the highest rated solutions were allocation of separate funds for Chinese language training and China studies, open access to Chinese academic websites, and permitting fruitful academic exchanges.
I think please stop here.
Yes,
please
sir.
stop here.
Yeah. So
because we have two more speakers. If you have a concluding sentence,
just a concluding sentence.
Just one concluding sentence.
Yes, sir. These are the preliminary findings of the survey, and we are really looking forward to suggestions and comments which will really help us in the next phases of the study. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a very important survey and a very important paper. I think we need a full seminar. I will recommend a full seminar on it. And to, the two indicated some very important positive findings and very, also challenging findings, which we have to address. And to Usha's very interesting formulation on the theory of language and sociology of language, just add also politics of language, which Chomsky is so famous for. Okay, now we move on now. It's an excellent paper. I think this is a very important project we must pursue. We now move to Arvind Yalari, who is taking us to the new technological opportunities and challenges that China studies present before us. Arvind.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And at the outset, I must thank ICS and Shabri ma'am, and also Ritisha for convening such a great panel. The earlier panelist, Venkat, and the paper by Usha and Raj have elaborated enough challenges which are present for the Chinese studies in India. What I'm trying to do is taking another perspective over here, interestingly, because most of us or those who enroll for China studies, and then the limitations, what the data had just been elaborated by Raj. It gives us kind of an idea, there are rising contradictions or limitations pursuing China studies in India, right from undergrad level to the graduation and going forward into research. I call it, non-academic way, it's something like a Chinese studies fatigue, because this is growing among PhD students, postdoc, think tankers, university researchers, and experts who are working on China, not in the universities, think tanks, but also in the corporate field. How to pursue this thing further, especially when there are growing restrictions and access restrictions to the China information coming from China. And this very much feeling and mental state leaves every one of us extremely tired and confronting with the realities that there are limitations and challenges to the research on China. As a result of it, what I'm trying to do is going into the research and have a small presentation over here. Is it visible?
Yes.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
So the title of the presentation is Reassessment of Methods and Tools of Research in China Studies. And essentially what this China Studies is, has bring in different aspects and challenges for us. I start with a caveat over here, is that my whole presentation is not all about talking the limitation per se, what China studies should be, but also talking about how to report and resolve the issues and difficulties doing research in China studies. As a result of it, the major problem statement for me over here would be to identify representative and reasonable sample in China, because as most of you have noticed, what happens when we do China studies or when we do area studies, essentially, as I have spoken in the abstract as well, is that area study is the core of some critical and groundbreaking theories, and then the debates in social sciences and humanities. And given this fact of accessibility and despite the role of progress made by the area studies, the state of research in area studies is suffering from a decline in intellectual material support. And as a result of it, what we find most challenging thing is to identify a representative and a reasonable sample in China. And this is not all about in the field of universities and think tanks. This is with everyone. With corporate field, those who are inviting investments, who are giving investment, driving investment out in India, in China. Even if there is a sample, if we find a sample, obtaining an accurate contact details list for the selected sample represents a second problem. So it is not the first to identify, but also to validate the sample thing. And on top of it, the third problem, which most of us and Indian researchers face, is that, and those, those whether they are in India or in Western university, is the crucial translation of the data collection instruments. That's where, I come back to the point of what Usha was talking about, the quality of translations and if the translation is being accessed correctly or not. The state of such a problematic, what I call it, and then the Merix had taken this article in 2018, they call China Kanin and China Kaunen. Knowing China and really understanding China, both are different. So one explains the superficiality of knowing China, completing a study of 1 and 2, and having an article or a study, and then knowing China much in a deeper sense. Because if you want to know China in much more deeper sense, you have to go through or traverse through a number of analytics over here. I'll give you, for example, over here. There is a metadata, gigadata of information out there on China. But what we do essentially is we get carried away with the traditional notion of literature, which is published in journals, published or spoken in conferences, or printed in terms of books. When we see China as an area study, whether that is communication, information, news being traversed, communicated through millions of nodes, terminals, you will see that there is a neoteric information source or information mediums flying and flowing through number of channels. If you see B picture, then what you do essentially using the technologies is you connect the major dots, which is called interrelated dots between that data. And then you relate or make a causal relationship between that data which is flying. If you look at this picture, ABC, I mean, I'm not really influenced by Parag Khanna. Parag Khanna uses this metrics, of explaining this, most of this neoteric information sources. What I'm trying to say is that there are number of sources on China which are available, accessible, but we do not have an access, either one or two, or we do not have information how to access it, which is, I think, has been lately understood thanks to COVID and thanks to these restrictions of movement and then, having access to China. That access in last 2 years have made us realize that are there any alternative sources to access information? To make it more simpler over here, what are the key facts when we look into these limitations and using the technological tools which come forward is one, they help us access the indigenous data, information, communications, which are intergalactic. Professor Dwara used the term galactic because there are so much of void, disruption in information access that these technological tools do help us or maybe facilitate us. Second is the time factor, because time is priceless and information is capital in the deployment of research methods. Though we have this anthropological benefit of time when we do PhD of having 2 years, 3 years, that is not the real case, when the dynamics of research are applied in case of government agencies, when the decision makers, when they have to take a quick decisions, for example, in 24 hours, 48 hours, or 1 month, then the time factor is quite crucial over here. And the third important thing, again, I'm going back to the presentation made by Usha/Raj, is about the monolingualism. We are so much obsessed to have information and books and read the journals written by the Western authors and in China. That really disrupts the cycle of the researcher, a typical researcher in India, how he should develop an ability to look at China using productivity factor, time factor, and access factor. So the fifth important dimension of looking forward or taking China studies forward in India could be using this technological. I'm not referring any particular platform over here because I'm not here to do some propaganda or some marketing for anyone over here. But importantly, there are 5 important pillars which the technology offers everyone who is doing research. We have seen that there are a number of fellowships available, but there are restrictions. Everybody doing research, no matter they are in electronic engineering, they are in bioengineering, or everyone, they are stuck with the problem of access to information, but they do not even know what the technology offers them. Technology offers them these 5th dimensions, and there are 5 important pillars to that. One is the content rubrics, which is called data fusion. So when you have a whole amount of data and you have to choose, and then you have to go forward. I'm coming to one of these points later on. Second stage of knowledge layering. Third is important is knowledge interface and self-content management. Fourth is data integration and data mining. Now, taking one example over here, last week, China published a white paper on satellite navigation and local services industry. Academics are interested, think tanks are interested, nomad research are interested in knowing this thing. Corporate technology savvy or other companies are want to know more about this thing actually. So applying those 5th dimension, how this would happen. When you talk about content rubrics or data fusion, what essentially you're talking is about collecting information by isolating and locating your key variables. There is a lot of information which is there, but then what is most important for every researcher is to isolate and locate it, which does not happen. Because again, going back to the key factor, we use English, right? We do not use Chinese language over here. And there is so much of information, we do not know how to isolate them. The second important thing which the tools, technological tools, which offer us an opportunity is to interpret and categorize it. Because you have so much of data, once you isolate them, you categorize them, and you just interpret, what this information says, whether that is important to me or not. The third important thing is knowledge interface and self-content management. Well, you have now funneled, you have now information, you have isolated it, you have interpreted it, but most important function of any researcher starts from here, is to what to see, what to measure, and how to measure. For example, there is so much of antagonism in India towards China after Gulman, but the businesses are growing. The dependence on Chinese technology has not stopped, whether those are being intensified. Someone who really does not know the language, what he would use a technological tool, just type HSN 901-480-90,000, and he finds these supplies or imports that India is doing from China. These are all related to antennas, navigation supplies, which India is doing it. For any budding researcher, what he would essentially do is he will try to go back to the literature, keep finding it using Google, but that is not the only way to have an access to this information. There is a lot of information. That is what I'm underlining over here. Next level is about data integration, data fishing. What happens is that in terms of satellite navigation, location service industries, once you have interpreted it, and once you have categorized it, once you have that pull lying next to you, what the tools, technological tools offer you is try to interpret, what is these global position networks and services have developed in China, right? China's Peito navigation satellite system. So you try to generate your own searches. GPS international market share. Who are the private players in China who are contributing to the success of Peito? It is not only the state agencies, it is not only the state enterprises, but also the private labs, the private enterprises whose contribution in China's satellite navigation system is really immense, and it is growing year on year. Then what are the state labs are doing and how they are filing patents, and are the patents owned by the state or by the individual enterprises or the labs in China? Then you do the time analytics and monitoring. This is an important stage for any researcher using the technology. So we are talking about narrative, idea, hypothesis. We're talking about language, accessibility of language, but beyond that, technological usage or tools of technological tools are quite important and critical over here. The last and not least, basically, when we do any studies, the technology which offers us is beyond what we famously know is AI, artificial intelligence, but the second flip side of it is data mining. When anyone can do the backlogging using the tools, technological tools. For example, if satellite navigation and location services, if there is a white paper talking about 600 billion of market, which is again a suboptimal estimate from the Chinese side, which is approximately 10 times larger than that. What you would do is you would start doing the backlogging. Okay, since when the Chinese state enterprises or Chinese government or state agencies started acquiring the technologies, when they started acquiring the smaller players over here. Second thing, that what amount of investments the Chinese government agencies have done over a period of time. And then what are the breakthroughs of imports? You just get through the data import factors, what kind of technologies they have been using it, whether are using the fluid technologies, chip technologies from which countries. So what I mean essentially is that, again, borrowing the word from Professor Dwara, once you have the right access through technological tools, you create your own mandala. This is what he used, and I was fascinated when I heard this term, and I said, okay, that is how I should rather conclude it, saying that the technological tools are newly developed. But, for example, if you talk about the MIT logs on China resources, is huge. But if you talk about Indian capacities in technologies, using technologies of newer cutting-edge technologies, we have a capacity to create that kind of reservoirs, a repository of information, which will be helpful for every researcher. He need not to know, again, with all the caveat, all the different things, language, history of China, civilization of China. He can do a cutting edge research by using or with the help of technology, as well as knowledge of language and the knowledge of China field studies as well. So I want to stop there. I think there will be more questions coming on this thing, and I'll be happy to take on this.
Thank you very much. I didn't stop you because it is exactly 15 minutes. And that was another excellent paper. I think we have the whole range of issues. We have from data scarcity pointed out by the three others, by the others, as well as your reference point to data explosion and I mean, in a way, big data management and how to handle it. We have several useful tools suggested by you. Thank you very much. Now we turn to the convener, the person who has planned this panel, Ritusamani Tiwari, who is addressing a very, very serious problem of the boundaries between language studies, area studies, disciplines, and several other categories. Ritusa, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I'll be sharing my screen now. Is it visible now?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Is it okay?
Yes.
All right. I would like to thank Professor Shabri for prodding me to organize this panel. It has been a very substantive communication that we have had over many months regarding the way this panel could shape out. And I'm very happy the way it has actually turned out, with the other papers highlighting very, very serious concerns. As the chair pointed out, I am looking at the blurring of methodological and disciplinary boundaries. And first, let me set certain dilemmas of Chinese studies that I see in India. One, of course, is the area studies versus meta-discipline, which is social sciences or languages. Second is looking at strategic security-led statist discourse versus our concerns regarding culture, society, and everything that is considered a non-state agenda. Third dilemma is the centricism that we see of bilateral and multilateral relations, overarching the entire discourse on China studies. Fourth is, of course, what I would like to say as utility-led discourse, whether it's utility for the state, utility for the media, utility for trade, etc. So that whole overwhelming imposition of utility, as it were, on China studies. And finally, fifth one that we have been talking about in previous panels on China studies in AICCS regarding how there is a narrow base of institutionalization and therefore a narrower scope of China studies. Certain queries that I raise in this paper are whether we are moving towards coalescing of interdisciplinarity, or there is still a preoccupation with Western theoretical, methodological, and disciplinary frameworks. The second question that I raise is, are there specific contexts for reading China in India? And third, how do the available contexts frame the disciplinary boundaries and the choice of methods to engage with China? And finally, what could be some of the India-specific methodological and disciplinary concerns as signposts for further research on China? The following two slides are actually my observations, and I think I'm going to take less than 12 minutes, but then I think I'll be more happy to answer the queries that come out of these brief presentations. The first observation is that China studies in India is experiencing a coalescence of methodological boundaries. And the data that I have actually tried to scan in this context is looking at the researches that have happened across China studies in India in various universities, and also looking at the major articles that have come up with a strong China lens. And looking at all of these over the years, it seems that most of the analysis has been exploratory, and there has been a presence, a credible presence of a comparative lens. Most of the analysis also looked at mixed methods and multi-methods in some way or the other. So there was no preoccupation with a single method. So most of the time, if you look at any of the research coming from Indian universities, you would see that the students and the researchers have been using mixed methodology. And I think that has kind of also enabled China studies in India in overcoming the problem of studied the Western man and spoke of mankind. So that kind of a imposition or superimposition of bringing in a Western perspective and simply generalizing it in the context of China has not happened in case of China studies in India. And I think that's actually a very welcome sign, and also something that we can build upon. So the disciplinary boundaries have been blurred as there has been entry of diverse scholarships which engage with and study China. And there has been a strong India-specific context, which presents an Indian perspective on China. And I feel that currently China studies in India are located somewhere between knowledge building exercise as a knowledge building exercise, and somewhere there is also a presence of utility focus. The next set of observation is what I was referring to, looking at the research on China as it emerged. In the 70s and 80s, the emerging studies devoted themselves to understanding the politics and modernization unfolding in China and inquiries into Chinese society's cultural aspects. The 90s and early 2000s, if we survey the research that came up, the growth miracle was unfolding in China, and therefore the questions regarding its political model, ideology, civil society, rights, and genders were taken up by various researchers in Indian universities. In 2000s and till 2022, what we see of it, the heterogeneity of topics has definitely increased. And I feel that one of the other positive signs regarding China studies in India is that there is little to no preoccupation with solving culture wars or competing for social scientific methods. So that entire rigidity about one-upping the culture when you study another one, and competing for social scientific methods, whether quantitative is to be emphasized or qualitative is to be emphasized. I mean, things or the dilemmas that the Western sinology has been grappling with, for instance, has in a way kind of escaped China studies in India. And I stretch my argument to suggest that the China studies in India did not completely inherit Western sinology's culturalist presumption or presupposition of Chinese otherness, as it adopted the core of Global South's motive of studying the society through a modernization theory. So that zeal to understand modernization theory, looking at other developing societies, being a part of Global South in case of India and Indian scholarship on China, kind of helped it escape the culturalist presupposition. Future signposts, which I outline here. The first one is that there is a great possibility of coalescing interdisciplinarity like never before. And I think the paper just before me by Arvind presented that point very well. As access to information and knowledge repository is faster and more efficient, and there is simply a blast of information as it were. The second is that knowledge creation and engagement with China is more and more based on a desire to know. And I think that basic instinct of understanding or desiring to know about China is what should also serve as a future signpost on any China studies in India. Identification with a particular discipline need not prevent an integral approach to China studies, as the case in India has been. It has been seen that it is possible to overcome the ascription of infallibility or self-sufficiency to any chosen discipline. So when we come from a training of, say, political science or history or language or culture, it's not necessary that there is a kind of presupposition of infallibility of that discipline from which now we are coming and trying to read China. And I think that, again, because I know that in previous analysis, China studies in India has been shown as a very porous or not a definitive discipline in terms of a disciplinary heritage. I feel that that is also a very important sign of future successes of our research, because then there is no ascription, there's no definitive ascription of any self-sufficiency for any chosen discipline from which we might want to read China. An India specific context of reading China is another welcome addition to knowledge building on China, as contextual perspectives do not necessarily represent the problem of culture wars, as I was telling about in social sciences. And the second last signpost for me is that the positivist fetishes of pure observation, raw experiences, unambiguous rationality, and one-way causality have gotten blurred in the context of China studies in India, because Indian context brings a gray area of observation, part fascination, part anxiety. Our own way of associating with China is not absolutely unambiguous, is not that of absolute unambiguous rationality and one-way causality. So looking at our own relations, the ups and downs that we have seen in India-China relations, I think that brings a gray area of observation when we read and study China. So therefore, that helps us escape the positivist fascination. And finally, there is a strong scope for expanding the discipline, altering the power-knowledge relationship, and engaging with transformative scholarship beyond any ethnocentric dichotomization. I think that is what we need to build upon, rather than simply looking at India-China comparative in terms of who is a better power, a bigger power. I think what we have over the years in terms of knowledge creation on China pushes us more towards a transformative scholarship, where we need not necessarily fall into any kind of ethnocentric dichotomization regarding India and China. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ritus. I think that was a sort of ambitious summing up of the entire field, its dilemmas and possibilities. And the transformative scholarship that you talked about really unfolds an agenda where all the present and future generations can assess themselves and how to go beyond the the ethnocentric models which have crippled scholarship for a long time. Thank you very much. In fact, these 4 papers constitute, I would say, a historical stock-taking of the field of China studies, not only in India, but also in our time, because all of you were placing your discussion in a wider context. From the field as it were, which and its practitioners and their challenges and achievements that Venkat had spelled out, to the the survey as well as the theoretical connection that language and the pursuit of knowledge in general present. And the concrete problems and possibilities which the survey brought out, and the technological tools which have opened up many new possibilities, and without being a slave to technology, how we can take full advantage of that. And now the very fundamental questions about scholarship and its location in society that Ritusa presented. I think it has been an excellent session. With these words, may I invite questions from the chat box as well as through the raise hand option. Can someone read out the chat box questions if we have? Otherwise, we will take up.
So as of now, we do not have any questions in the chat box. I would encourage all the panelists to please use the raise hand option and unmute yourself only when called upon by the chair to do so.
Would the panelists like to engage in a conversation until somebody raises hand? Somebody would like to come in? Anyone?
If I may,
Yes, Ritusha.
I have a question for Arvind. Very fascinating presentation, so much so that I actually forgot my own paper. I was listening to your presentation. And as someone who's trying to deal with this, more and more in my own research, how do you exactly navigate this whole plethora of information? Do you think that there is still there is a lot of politics in the way information is available to us, even though it is now in huge volumes what we see? So if I am investigating, say, a very generic thing like state-owned enterprises, what is the share of their of these SOEs in say overall productive empirics? The way these data, which is huge in volume, the way it is present, do you still see a kind of power asymmetry in terms of the representation of data? And when we are using AI-enabled tools, do you think that there is still a chance in terms of just falling prey to the power asymmetry without realizing it, as to what kind of data we are consuming?
Well, I think information is, I will not call it a new oil. I don't want to subscribe to that statement, but yes, data is very important. Everybody controls data, and what we call it is everybody wants to gatekeep the data. For example, look at the common behavior, human behavior. If I'm doing something research, I'm still being driven by an idea that why should I share that data with somebody else, right? All of us, okay? We don't share data. But somebody who has an access to the data, the gateways and terminals, he will definitely try to keep it. Right away from somebody like Rupert Murdoch to somebody who is acquiring News 18 or somebody in India, okay? What I mean is basically, everybody wants to control the source of data. That's number one. Second thing is that most of these algorithms using the platforms like Python and all these things have been created by the human beings. They want certain things to be identified, searched, scrapped, scrolled, and categorized. So there is a human intervention. Wherever there is a human intervention, that means that those are subjective, political, or restrictive in that sense. So as a result of it, most of the information is gatekept and restricted. For example, I can give you a site without taking names. Every one of us subscribe to approximately 1 or 2 dozens of newsletters, right? But in those newsletters, we read what the newsletter curator is trying to say, not something what we want to say, right? One. Second thing that, okay, fine, if he's not saying something, he will try to collect and try to give you a bucket of articles, what he thinks are important for you. Again, at the second level, your idea and your objectivity of accessing the research is shut down. So now, since the technology is available, I'm talking about few platforms. It restricts me talking at this forum because this is the academic forum. Are there which gives an access you to curate what you want to access from data collected from mesh of things. Okay, this is what Usha had written in her abstract also, that language has number of faces, flavors, narrations. Okay, knowing the language is not only important because that is superficial. You need to get into the meaning. You need to get under the skin of it, right? And as a result of it, that's one level of information. Second problem is that China, what we see China, and the problem is that we try to deploy tools from the Western perspective, where they see that China is a homogeneous country, which is not the fact. China is not a homogeneous country. For example, after 1980, people say that other people have become, they have an access to material comfort, greater freedom, more diverse lifestyle, which is not the fact, because there are ongoing socio-political transitions characterized by the coexistence of rival potential political economic systems of Confucianism, Marxism, and capitalism in China, which is not reflected in the mainstream English literature over there. As a result of it, it is important to have the ability or you should have a technology which enables the better research. That is what I'm underlining. And there are sources. I can tell you one such platform which Merix is using. Merix should give me royalty for that. But I'm saying something like that, it is there. And there are a lot of them which is using. And right now, thankfully, I'm a part of a project which the missions are using it. They're going to have, because the question is not about the question is, I'm not questioning the language. Language is very important. Translation is very important. But before that, can you aggregate the information? Information aggregation is important. Knowledge layering is important. Compartmentalization information is important. Then you get something which is really right next in your plate. Then you can say that, okay, well, now let me curate it. Let me prepare an outstanding dish out of it. Right? There comes what Usha was pointing out, translations, language flavors. But somebody, for example, he's in biotechnology. That person, poor guy, doesn't know even what is biotechnology called in Chinese. And then he says that I want to have an access to primary sources. So, confusion, and it's a double confusion. And, what Raj was talking about, he gets frustrated. He gets frustrated in 1 week. He said, okay, forget about it. I'll just go and search, what MIT is doing, what people in Boston sitting doing, I'll better do it. So originality of Indian perspective in China studies will come by using better tools in a better way. I can talk on this, I can go on this, but I will stop. Sorry, sir, you're muted.
So you're muted.
Subhadeep, you want to ask a question?
Yes, sir. So, sir, my question is regarding there was a discussion on chip and AI. So China is currently following the zero COVID policy. So recently the Apple has to downgrade its target for the years because of this policy. So in a long run, what do you see? What would be its impact on the China's aspect of gaining full China made in China in AI and this chip technology? That is one question. Second is that like China wants to compete with TMSC. So what do you think? How far China can take on TMSC? And if so, then by when do you think on this prospect?
I think I will partly answer this question, but I request Venkat sir to come in. He has done a brilliant work on cases. Okay. Somebody in China studies, first one in China studies doing the case studies. I mean, amazing work. So I will ask him to come in later. Just to start answering a question, China will never will be able to take on TSMC. Okay, let me take it by horns. It's difficult because there is a whole ecosystem. What you see, a chip is a product of an years of investment. One chip. If you go to the wafer making, the water that they use is absolutely 1000% purified. Okay, they need a stable environment, right from stable light, the blue light, and everything. The Chinese failed to do it. Chinese have been doing it for the last 20 years. TSMC went, they failed. There are other things, most of the chip makers, if you go and do the biometric study, not in a very funny way, of Chinese companies, they have the Taiwanese investments. The Chinese companies, right from Beijing, Tianjin, who tried to do it, failed. So China knows that it wants to leverage, it wants to get out of this thing, and want to become the largest chip maker. It's possible, but not the best in the quality chip maker in the world. If there's a problem on it, I'll reserve the rest of the answer. Venkat, if you can just come in.
Venkat, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, you see, I was reading somewhere that Xi Jinping, which likens Xi Jinping's call for tech self-reliance on the chip front as same which Mao exhorted during the Great Leap Forward to overtake British steel production in 15 years. So on the surface, the Chinese leadership is going with a certain degree of confidence. It is publicly exhibiting that kind of confidence. But for now, the Americans have definitely been able to postpone Chinese plans, if not abandon their plans. So, for example, if you look at the latest Chips and Science Act 2022, what does the Chips and Science Act tell you? I mean, it is a very, very huge thing as far as choking China's tech progress on the chip front is concerned. So the Americans are saying that none of the American firms, both manufacturing within US and outside US, can export chips to China. Number two, they are saying that not only American, but non-American firms who are using any kind of chip or any kind of equipment or any kind of design in which even an iota of American technology is used, they cannot basically supply chips and other related stuff like equipment and software and even those components which actually constitute get assembled and form an equipment manufacturing chip. And to ascertain whether whether a non-American company is using American technology or not, they need to basically approach the Department of Commerce to get a license. Now, this is what they have done. Next, the Americans have also, dangled the carrot of, asking TSMC more than 90% of its chips exports was to China. But since Trump came, they have said that we will subsidize you, you come over, and they're also encouraging TSMC to diversify their exports basically in non-China regions. So multiple, things are going on here. As far as what is going to happen now, we already know that Huawei's sales not only abroad, as far as their smartphone is concerned, within China also has dropped. Number one. Number two, Apple is also facing the heat because for a very long time, as far as Apple is concerned, its iPhone models, the supply chain for its iPhone models was something worth emulating across the industry. But given this choking by the Americans of China on that tech front, chips and semiconductors, etc., Apple is now forced to have two separate supply chains. One where it is sourcing, stuff from YMTC for iPhones to be made for the Chinese market, and develop another supply chain, for iPhones which they are going to sell in the non-Chinese markets. So this is really big, and this tech value chain disruption is seriously hurting China. What they are, how they're reacting to it in the public domain is different. But as I said, I'll stop here. The Americans have definitely postponed, China's emergence as a tech power, if not abandoned. Whether the Chinese will be able to overcome all this, Chinese, we know what Chinese are capable of, and they can always have a surprise here and there. But as of now, really, that the Americans have quite successfully weaponized this kind of a dependence of China on American chips.
Okay. Any more question? Do we have any more raised hand or from the chat box? In that case, I will ask every panelist to give a 1 or 2 minute comment on two things. What, according to you, is the most important task on the intellectual front for China studies in India and on the institutional front? One key, I think you have implied, but I would now like you to prioritize. One key intellectual task, one key institutional task. We go in the reverse order, okay? We can start with Ritusa.
Sir, as you said, one intellectual task. I think my last slide regarding signposts is actually full of them, but one, if I had to choose out of them, would be that we need to build upon what we already have. I feel that there is also a lot of despondency in terms of the way we have created knowledge on China. And there is some kind of, I won't say, there is some kind of non-passionate relook at what we have had for last 30 years. I think there is some kind of passion that is required to just own up the global South perspective that we have actually in very big way presented from India on China. And that's a very unique perspective. That unique contextualization of Indian perspective on China is something that we have been wary of. We have not owned it up sufficiently. And I think as intellectual pursuers and engagers of knowledge on China, we should own up our context. I think that's one intellectual task I see ahead of us. Institutionally, of course, those of us who are in a position to engage with a wider base on knowledge creation regarding China, on need to know China, on a desire to know China, we should kind of carry that agenda on our sleeves all the time. So there is no problem and there is no issue in being called a China wala in that sense when I move in my institutions across various categories, political science. I mean, I'm always hopping categories: political science, area studies, international relations. I have no qualms in saying, but I am a China person. So I think that's how we do it institutionally. Bring in China wherever possible, even if it is within the broader rubrics of some other discipline, some other kind of institution. I think we all are in that position, and we are trying to do that as enthusiastically as possible.
Thank you. Aravind.
Sir, we have a question from Ambassador Kantha in the chat box.
Okay, read it out.
Yes, sir. To what extent the COVID pandemic, and more specifically China's zero COVID policy, impacted China studies in India through exit of Indian scholars from China, suspension of field studies, absence of in-person meetings and interviews, non-access to archives in China, and so on. How do we see the situation easing up, given the compounding factor of downturn in India-China relations and enhanced negativity in India towards China?
All right. We go in that order. You start with answering Ambassador Kantha's question, then answer the two questions I put. Aravind.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Ambassador Kant, for asking this question. Let me speak very openly over here. That, I mean, since most of the strategic meetings I've been part of in PKU and on that Shenzhen campus, there has been less enthusiasm in China to have the maintaining the MOUs and helping the Indian students coming on the campus. It is explicitly mentioned, and I know this is being recorded, but let me be on the record again. So there is the least interest, thing from the Chinese side inviting the Indian scholars over here, and it is impacting negatively, and it is impacting very badly as far as Indian researchers concerned, or access or methods like participative research, where you distribute, you talk, you engage, and try to get more hands-on experiences, or intensive field research are concerned, that is being limited now. That leaves us with non-China fields, for example, that is Taiwan, or maybe the other research area, where we have to pursue more research. As a result of it, we have to go with non-incisive methods and tools to know about China, because that is very important so far. And I was mentioning in my presentation also, field studies were important, participative research were important, and then access to Chinese information and people, and then such nodal points were very important. But now I think what has made us realize is that there has to be some alternative to that as well. Now the situation is easing up, but I don't think the situation has really eased up. And I think it will take at least a couple of years when it will go back to normalcy. So that is my take on that. Coming back to Professor Mohanty's two questions about the intellectual task or the institutional task, I think most importantly, what has happened is post-Galvin, there has been a lot of interest among everyone who wants to know on China. Somebody who's making chips, somebody who's in the cement factory, somebody he is into agro food processing, or maybe cold chains. Everybody wants to know China studies. What exactly what Usha was talking about? The boundaries, horizons of China studies is widening. and widening beyond our imagination at very, very special, very, very dynamic rate. So if we take care of it, maybe we enhance. And again, going back to, Venkat's point, it should not Delhi be speaking always, right? Regional centers, Venkat has been doing a lot of work. China Studies Center in Chennai, the IITs have been doing a lot of work. I think that we need to disseminate that intellectual responsibility and accountability to non-Delhi centers as well. It is very important. I know as far as intellectual takeaway from this conference or from this debate is concerned. And secondly, about the institutional. Again, taking few points, having conference and post-conference brainstorming and workshop is quite essential for institutions like ICCS, IIT Guwahati, and in the partnering institutions, including CAS or others, to come back and say that, what are the real, deliverables as an institution? That is very important over here. So there would not be a void between what we perceive and narrate at intellectually and we try to operationalize it at institutional level. If we just try to bridge that gap and void, I think we will be somewhere near to the real goal of conferences like this. That is my opinion, sir.
Thank you very much. Now, Usha and Raj, yes. Usha Chandran.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you for the very important questions. I think I'll start with the COVID. Definitely COVID has, as you have yourself mentioned, Ambassador Kanta, that the COVID has actually stalled or perhaps paused, so many ongoing work and accessibility and everything. And I think what has happened in the process is that suddenly there is this urgent, or there's the highlighted concern of border and security concern because of this general environment, which, as you've also said, that this enhances the negativity. So there is this the whole focus is now shifted to and limited. The research is perhaps more and more limited to border and politics related issue, not even actually politics related issue, but India-China. So, and that is a very big, issue that has happened. And I don't know how that is going to ease out. And maybe with a lot more opening up and more exchange of scholars and, and even among the students, there is this heightened interest towards India-China than other fields. So, I mean, I'm not saying all, but it is increasing. So coming back to Mohanty sir's question, I think it's very important, and thank you for giving this opportunity to actually do this exercise. I think the need is to enhance in the China studies research in India is to enhance the at the intellectual level. There is a need to enhance the use of original source in Chinese, and also acquire the discipline and area studies knowledge, so as to keep the methodological and comparative skills intact, and use that for analyzing China and institutional level. I think there's a need for a more infrastructural support, especially as in the chat box Madhurendra had also mentioned, and this is a problem in all the university where the Chinese language teaching has started. There's a dearth of teachers, and one or two teachers are actually teaching the entire 3-year course or 5-year integrated course. So I think that's a very, very important issue that at the institutional level it should be addressed. Apart from that, latest lab facilities and access to online materials, which has been blocked by both the sites, and providing important and relevant journals in the libraries, access to journals. So even that has been stopped. So that is something I think it's very important, that is to combining, and perhaps at the institutional level, there can be more effort to combine intensive language learning along with discipline learning.
Thank you.
And training. Thank you.
Thank you. Raj, you would like to add?
Yes, sir. Just to add to some of the points to what ma'am just said, I think all these points were also reflected in our survey analysis as answering Ambassador Kanta's question, that the top two factors that the researchers faced were faced where non-availability of resources along with the COVID-induced obstacles, which include not being allowed to go to China because of visa issues, visa delays, and other factors. And on your questions, sir, on the intellectual task and the institutional task, I think the intellectual task, I'm answering it from the answers that were reflected through the surveys. That on the intellectual task that is most important and should be focused on is bringing together the Chinese language competency and the discipline training together, so as one, so that because we many a times see that people who are very adept with Chinese language do not have the proper methodological framework to see China, and those who are trained in discipline may fall short of accessing reliable resources, which could have made their research much more valuable. And the institutional task that we can see is, it may sound like a broken record, but recognizing the importance of Chinese and China studies, there seems to be a recognition that it is important, but that recognition does not necessarily reflect on at the ground level. Like many things are lacking. We as researchers ourselves, as reflected in the survey, feel that there is non-availability of resources. We cannot access resources due to various reasons. They can be due to lack of funds. There are no subscriptions in the universities, or perhaps language labs are not equipped with the appropriate technology, and a myriad of different issues.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Venkat, please, last word.
Yeah. So responding to Ambassador Ashok Kanta, sir, it needed more than 8 and 9 years of persistence on my part to, enable my students experience what China is. And I did that in 2018. And in 1 week's trip, I not only was able to, inspire a certain kind of an interest among students, I was able to, start my homework for 3 case studies in 1 week of trip. And I was so much, full of optimism that what is in store for me as I, continue this. Unfortunately, COVID came and destroyed everything. I don't know when I'll be able to revive that. I think that sums up, our concern. Intellectual task, for a very long time, we have been saying that we need to develop an Indian version of sinology. We say that that's an ethnocentric approach towards science. We should not get carried away by Western analysis. Given that the kind of civilizational ties that we have, the socio economic and cultural, complexities that India has, if we are not able to understand China, who else will? We are most ideally positioned. In that way, we are in a position to do a great deal of service to the cause of sinology. But that somehow has not happened. Why it has not happened? That is the intellectual challenge for us to address that question. Institutionally, I think we need to have a certain kind of a division of labor. So we have IISc Bangalore, we have IITs, we have IIMs. So there are a wide across of issue areas. So why not, depending on the specialization of these educational institutions, the top leadership insists that due to national security importance, we need to have comparative studies, and let's find out what are we doing and what is China doing. And let's try to basically have a constructive kind of a competition rather than, having a very adversarial mindset. I think that will help us develop a more, informed understanding. And again, not for anyone else, but for our own interest. So, the institutional challenge then is that, let us not, talk about all are equals. Every field of study is important. Let us accept that in this big bad world, some are more equal than others. And, sinology deserves deserves a certain place for our interest, and we better give it that due importance. And this is the institutional challenge.
Thank you very much. That has been a great panel with great ideas and contributions to this, stock taking of China studies in India. I will only add, responding to the last point that Venkat made about Indian version of sinology or Indian perspective. There is no one Indian perspective, but we need to take up Indian problems, Indian cultural, historical questions, Indian, cultural, geographical, experiences, Indian economic issues, in every field. Take up an issue that you see happening in India, and you see in the global South perspective what is happening in the world, and you look at China. And you then see what connection, comparison is not about putting the two things together in the same cover of the book. Comparison is about establishing relationships of more than one unit, and so that we gain more knowledge about certain problem. Therefore, Indian perspective has to be pluralistic, yet has to be specific, connected with some problem, some issue that you have seen in the Indian context or Indian history.
Yes.
With that, I really thank Ritusha for putting this brilliant panel together, and Sabari for planning this and making it the first special panel. Thank you all very much. We have had a great half a day this day, following yesterday's panel and today. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone,
Thank you, sir.
co-panelists.
Thank you,
Yeah. Thank you, Ritusha.
I
And
would
Sabri,
like
ma'am.
to. Okay. Sorry, sir.
No, that's okay.
I would like to thank all the panelists for your detailed presentations. The video recording of all our sessions will be available on the ICS YouTube channel. We shall now have a short break and resume at 2 p.m. for the thematic panel 1. The theme for the next panel is Northeast India and Trans-Himalayan Connections, Culture and Trade. Please note that the meeting room will remain open for the next session. You could stay, log in, or you can join again for the next session. The host and the co-host will remain available and to conduct the audio and video check half an hour before the next session. Again, to reiterate, the next session starts at 2 p.m.